Once upon a time. Welcome to Australian Book Lovers, your destination for imagination.
A big warm welcome to everyone and a huge thank you for joining us once again for the Australian Book Lovers Podcast. Our mission, as always, is to bring fabulous Australian and Indigenous literature spanning a whole range of genres to book lovers all around the globe, as well as fantastic resources and information for passionate authors looking to write their next bestseller. I am Darren Kazenko, science fiction, dystopian and horror author, reader, and one of your co-hosts and co-founders of Australian Book Lovers, coming to you today from Ghana country, a little bit wet and a little bit grey, but still, it's a beautiful place.
There you go. I am Veronica Strachan, aka V.E. Patton, fantasy, memoir, picture book writer and science fiction draft manuscript writer, also at the moment voracious reader of many genres, and the other one of your co-founders and hosts, coming to you from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country here in the Kulin Nation, and on a day where we're actually putting together episode 80 of the podcast. I think that is pretty amazing, and a pat on the back to you, Darren, for all of the hours and hours of editing, and good on us for doing that. Just a little hurrah hurrah.
Absolutely, episode 80. And the best part is that means we're, when it comes to looking back in time in Australia, that means we're in the 1980s. So obviously a very special decade close to my heart, and still is. But yes, huge show coming up. Now, you had a wonderful opportunity to talk with an astounding guest for this episode.
Yes, yeah, absolutely fantastic. So the interview we've got for you today is with Ashley Kalagian Blunt. And while we talk a lot about her book, Dark Mode, which is really good and has just come out, there's also a lot of books that sort of led up to her publishing Dark Mode. And as always, it's like people say, they were just an instant success. Well, no, there's very few writers that are instant successes. It's a lot of work that's gone into a lot of different writing, and Ashley was very generous with her time and all of the information, and wonderful woman to chat with. So really looking forward to sharing that with everybody.
Yeah, for sure. So that's definitely coming up in the show. But would you like to know what the number 80 is supposed to mean now that we're
Absolutely,
here finally
Darren.
in the greatest
on the
decade?
Edge of my seat.
Well, apparently the number 80 is associated with change and transformation. It is considered a sign of new beginnings and a positive change in your life. It is that number 80 is a number of great abundance and profound mystery. Mm-hmm. So there we go.
Yeah, look, I think the number 8 is quite lucky for a number of people. I, in fact, had put a number 8 in one of my emails because at one time I think I'd read something about number 8, can't remember exactly, and of course having just my name wasn't working, so because I think I'd had that ages ago and then completely forgot what the password was, so yes, number 8 is lucky, but with a 0 on the end, I don't know how that changes it.
Well, technically 8 I think is a bit lucky because it's infinity, isn't it, with the way it's written. And of course 0 is kind of infinity, so 8, 0. I remember reading an article years ago now that the 8, if you could get mobile numbers, especially in like over in the Asian countries, 8 was such, you'd pay massive prices for as many 8s as you could get in your mobile number because of the mysticism about it. So, but would you like to know a little bit about Australia in 1980 now that we're in
Indeed, because I was, was I living? No, I'd left home well and truly by that stage, and living out and about.
Oh, wow.
Then I finished my nursing,
and here I was thinking 1980 is probably when my memory started to really formulate, I think.
I had a couple of decades on you there.
Yeah, I'm thinking, this is when I start to remember roller skating.
Oh, yeah, the 80s was good, and leg warmers and big shoulders and big hair. Yeah, all good. Keep going. Tell us what it says.
Well, quite a few interesting things. So to start with, in 1980 in Australia, Debbie Wardley became Australia's first female pilot to take to the skies when she co-piloted a Fokker Friendship on Ansett Flight 232. It was a so-called milk run from Alice Springs to Darwin. So it marked the end of a 15-month legal battle with Ansett Airlines to overcome gender-based discrimination that had prevented her from earlier taking the controls. So a bit of a turn there, so very good.
Yep.
On a somewhat sombre note, rock singer Bon Scott of the legendary band AC/DC was found dead at the age of 33, and he's left quite a shadow and quite an impact cultural one, obviously in the music, and a bit of an Australian icon. So yeah, a bit of a sad day there. Now this, I'm not going to make any jokes, but I do think this is a little bit ironic. On the 13th of April, a sensitive report titled "The Threat of the Internal Security of Australia" was lost by the Office of National Assessment.
Yeah,
so, I think that's pretty
That's terrible.
funny. But here's an interesting one. Australia's first quote-unquote test tube baby was born in Melbourne's Royal Women's Hospital. So, I didn't realise it happened that far back. I thought that was something a little bit later in the 80s, shall I say, but what would I know? Another thing when it came, a bit shocking to me, women were first allowed to join surf clubs as full members in 1980, and that's strange. I just don't imagine that they ever couldn't. So
there's a lot of things that it's still to unpack, but yeah, the sort of 60s to 80s, there's a lot of just gradual cutting of some of those ridiculous ties that closed places to women.
Thankfully, yes. Now, we did talk briefly about the number 80 having also an air of mystery. Well, could there be any bigger mystery than 9-week-old Azaria Chamberlain going missing from a campsite at Ayers Rock in 1980? So most of us would know the story there, and that was just the beginning of a long and complicated story, absolutely. Here's an interesting one as well. Turkish Consul General Sarık Aryak and his bodyguard Engin Seaver were shot dead in the streets outside the consulate in Sydney, in Dover Heights.
Absolutely they were. And of course, in the chat that I have with Ashley, you will see how integral that particular episode is to her and her family and her life and her country, because she has a part of her family are from Armenia. So
interesting.
And the Armenian genocide that was why this, apparently why the Turkish consul was shot. But so wait to hear more about that.
All right, I won't go delve into that anymore.
No.
Here's something that I've never heard about myself. This is interesting. So this is in New South Wales again. So on the 19th of December, the Maitland Woolworths was bombed, and it basically suffered more than $300,000 worth of damage. Right. The next day in Orange, the Woolworths there received a call from a man threatening to bomb the Woolworths unless he was paid $1 million. 4 days later, on Christmas Eve, Woolworths Town Hall store in the centre of Sydney is devastated by a bomb blast. So that was the third to be targeted in 9 days. Now, authorities received only 10 minutes warning of the bombing, which miraculously, so it says, caused no serious casualties after 2,000 shoppers and staff were evacuated. On the 26th of December, police offered a $250,000 reward for information relating to the Woolworths bombings, and it, at that time, was the largest ever offered in Australian history. Now, I'm going to have to delve into that a bit more because I didn't find out whether they did catch the person responsible.
There you go. Well, we'll leave you to chase that up in another episode. Now, of course, we have the bingo numbers, which are, sadly, they come to a close. I think I've only got about 10 left because that's kind of where we get up to. 80 is a little bit ho-hum. I tried a couple of different sort of lists, but it can either be 8 and blank or blind 80.
Neither of them are really set fire.
They're not really setting me on fire, are they? No. So I thought that I might give you some new words from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig. So, and these are kind of along the way of the dark and unsettling book that Ashley has written, and some of the things she talks about in her interview. So, rubetosis doesn't immediately spring to mind as what it might be, but it is in fact a noun that John has put together, and it is the unsettling awareness of your own heartbeat, whose tenuous muscular throbbing feels less like a metronome than a nervous ditty your heart is tapping to itself, the kind that people compulsively hum or sing while walking in complete darkness, as if to casually remind the outside world, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here.
Interesting. That's kind of, as you described that, the first thing that came to mind was like a 3 a.m. panic attack.
Yeah. So rubetosis, that is what you're experiencing. All right, the next one is La Gordière, and excuse me if I've pronounced it a little wrong, John, but that looks like a French acute accent there. The glint of goodness inside people, which you can only find by sloshing them back and forth in your mind until everything dark and grey and common falls away, leaving behind a constellation at the bottom of the pan, a rare element trapped in exposed bedrock, washed there by a storm somewhere upstream.
A definitely more complex take on the Don't Judge a Book by its cover. You dig down and search for that diamond.
Yeah, I really love that. I love that the sense, because I think with the sloshing in the bottom of the pan, anyone who's done a little bit of gold panning can just imagine the slosh and you get rid of the dross, and lo and behold, there you are. Okay, my final one from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows is Quebico. Quebiko. I suspect you might know a better way to pronounce it than me. Quebico. It is a state of exhaustion inspired by an act of senseless violence, which forces you to revise your image of what can happen in this world, mending the fences of your expectations, weeding out invasive truths, cultivating the perennial good that's buried under the surface before propping yourself up in the middle of it like an old scarecrow who's bursting at the seams but powerless to do anything but stand there and watch.
That is a very unique word and definition there. I think, is he touching on sudden rage and how it can leave you spent, or?
Yeah, and again, interesting because, Ashley's book starts with a very violent event, and just that state of exhaustion inspired by an act of senseless violence. We were we went out to a show last night, and my daughter and a friend and hubby were all in the car, and I thought we'd just flick the news on, see what was going, but it seemed like everything was an act of senseless violence that they're reporting, and we just said, just turn it off. We've just had such a positive, enjoyable time that you just do feel exhausted by senseless violence, and makes you think that the world is out there, I don't know, doing things.
I think it was, Bill Hicks, the comedian, was talking about how you're watching news or listening to the news on the radio, and eventually you just feel like the world's about to explode. It's just upside down. It's crazy. But then if you turn it off and open the window, all you hear is a few birds whistling in the trees.
And indeed, sort of feeling like that you are an old scarecrow bursting at the seams but powerless to do anything but stand there and watch. So if that's how you're feeling, then perhaps you're feeling Quebico.
That could be an interesting song title too, or a book title if it take that idea and run with it. It'll be easy to do the research, that's for sure. Just turn on the TV or turn on the internet.
Indeed we will. All right, so there you go. So 3 new words from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig. There you go. Is it time for the Reader's Cafe?
I thought maybe we'd pop to some news first.
Oh, some news, of course.
Yeah, we'll jump to some news. And I'll lead us into the news by letting our listeners know in 1980 there was a wonderful invention in Australia.
All right.
The dual flush system. So there we go. Again, changing the world forever. Let's jump in for some news.
Very good.
Okay, some brief news for episode 80. I thought I would just let our listeners know about 2 writing competitions coming up, which I think would be an amazing opportunity to get your work out there, to inspire you to get the pen or the keyboard and set it on fire. The first one is the Australian/Vogels Award for Young Writers, and it is considered the most prestigious Australian award for an unpublished manuscript by a writer under the age of 35. So the winning manuscript in this award will receive prize money of $20,000 and will be published in 2024 by Allan and Unwin with an advance against royalties. So basically, the Australian/Vogels award-winning authors have usually gone on to win or be shortlisted for other major awards, such as the Miles Franklin Award, Commonwealth Writers' Prize and Booker Prize. Now, entries for the 2024 award are open and will close on the 31st of May. Entrants must be Australian citizens or permanent residents. The manuscript submitted with the entry form should be a work of fiction, Australian history or biography. It must be a minimum length of 50,000 words and a maximum of 80,000 words. The manuscript must be an original work entirely by the entrant and it must be written in English. It cannot be under consideration to any other publisher or entered into any other award. No more than 10% of the manuscript can have been previously published in print form or in electronic form on a commercial basis. So Allan and Unwin will publish the winning entry and will have exclusive worldwide publishing rights to it and to any other entry they feel is of sufficient merit. So there is an entry fee of $25 and that's applicable to each manuscript entered, and you can find all the further details by visiting allanandunwin.com. So that is the Australian/Vogels Award for Young Writers. So $20,000 prize money and published by Allan and Unwin, potentially for international launch. That is a pretty massive prize.
That's tempting.
It is indeed. But something probably a little bit more realistic for me with my time frames is the short story competition. So this is for basically the big issue. And they've got their 19th annual fiction edition coming up. So their advertisement reads as follows: have you got a short story? So submissions are now open for the Big Issues 19th annual fiction edition.
Very
Be
good.
part of the biggest selling fiction magazine in Australia. This special edition will feature work from today's best-loved writers as well as a selection of open submission. So previous editions have featured stories from Jane Harper, Tony Birch, Matthew Riley, Melanie Chang, Maxine Beneba Clark, a whole range. Now, the Big Picture are looking for stories for all kinds: literary, comedy, romance, sci-fi, crime, and everything in between. Submission details. This is the stuff we all want to really know. Entry is free and open to writers based in Australia. Every author that is published will receive $500. Now, stories should be between 500 and 3,000 words. They must be previously unpublished. Now, submissions are limited to one story per person, and they've asked to please submit as a Word document attachment, double-spaced with 12-point text. So your name, email, full postal address and phone number must be included in the body of the email, separate from the story, as the submissions are judged anonymously. So to enter, all you have to do is email your story to fiction@bigissue.org.au. Entries close midnight on the 1st of June. So get cracking, get an entry in there. It's completely
Indeed,
free.
it is really good. I always make sure I have that copy because I'm not always in the city and I should get myself a subscription to Big Issue. But yes, I like to support that initiative. Met some great people selling the Big Issue over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, I mean, what a great way to get your writing out there. Those magazines
Lots
get
of
into
people
the
reading.
hands of lots of different people, yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple more prizes for people to be thinking about. So applications are open for the Richelle Prize for Emerging Writers for unpublished writers of adult fiction and adult narrative non-fiction. The winner receives a year's mentoring with a Hachette publisher as well as $10,000 in prize money from Hachette Australia. So applications opened just a couple of days ago, 13th of April. They are open until a while, I'm going to say, because I've lost where they're open to, but it has only just opened, so get yourself in there. It's a 12-month publishing mentorship with Hachette and $10,000. The Historical Novel Society of Australasia, HNSA, in partnership with Australia's leading essential building and infrastructure services provider, the ARA Group, is excited to announce that entries for the 2023 ARA Historical Novel Prize are now open. Now, we get quite a lot of people listing their historical fiction books with us, so it is quite a popular genre. And even within historical writing, there are, of course, thrillers and detective and romance and fantasy and all those kind of things. So it is quite a broad genre. So there you go. Have a look for at hnsa.org.au for the historical novel. That is really hard to say. The Historical Novel Society Australasia and the Arrow Group have got the Historical Novel Prize open. One more. Walker Books, who I always think of it in terms of selling children's school books, young adult, those kind of things. So Walker Books Australia, it is their 30th anniversary this year, and they have announced the establishment of a new manuscript prize to coincide with that anniversary. They are going to offer the winner a publishing contract with an advance against royalties. The prize will be awarded biennially for an unpublished manuscript containing 5,000 to 80,000 words written for a readership of 5 years and older and suitable for formats of junior, middle grade or YA fiction. So all you junior, middle grade and YA fiction writers, this one is for you. And the aim is to, I really like this, the aim is of the manuscript prize is to foster a new generation of Australian voices who best represent Walker Books' values of excellence, accessibility and inclusivity. The manuscript will be judged on literary merit, its originality, use of language and on its representation of Walker's values. And the inaugural prize shortlist will be judged by authors Sally Murphy, Gerard Foster and none other than our own Kate Foster, which is just brilliant. Yeah, so I'm very excited about that. So there you go. Junior fiction for readers 5 to 8, 5,000 to 20,000 words. Middle grade 8 to 12, 30,000 to 50,000 words. And young adult for readers 12 and older, 50 to 80,000 words. And this is why I was getting confused with the other prize because it opened at the same time, 12th of April, closes on the 1st of August. The winner announced 26th of October. Entries open to residents of Australia and New Zealand and non-resident citizens of Australia and New Zealand, except employees and immediate families of Walker Books, of course. There you go. More information on the Walker Books website. But one more really important piece of news, Darren. Mm-hmm. You may remember that the National Cultural Policy, the Revive initiative announced by the now federal Labor government, is providing $12.9 million over 4 years to modernise and extend the lending rights schemes to include ebooks and audiobooks. So you've heard us talking before about public lending rights, PLR, education lending rights, the ELR schemes, which means that if your books are bought by libraries or schools, then you get a royalty every time somebody borrows them from the library. But that up until now has only been for hard copies, for paperback books. But they are making $12 million available over 4 years to modernise and extend the lending rights. And really, 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 really important for all writers, get your book registered with the National Lending Rights Scheme, and you can go to Lending Rights Online and that'll take you to the proper government website where you need to have a register as a creator, and whether you're make sure if you're a traditionally published author, make sure that they've got your details in there as well. If you're a self-published or indie published author, make sure that you register as a publisher as well and get your claims in there. You've got until the 30th of June. So anything after that will be in the next year. So if anybody's currently borrowing your books in the library, you won't get it until you've registered. So it's a little bit tricky. I had a little bit of trouble. I've got, of course, my paperbacks registered, but then I had a couple that I hadn't done. This was a good reminder. But register your ebook first and verify the ISBN, and then away you go. And in case you missed it with our little glitch in the matrix, if you want to know more information about lending rights online, the public lending and the educational lending, especially the new digital claims, go to lendingrights.arts.gov.au. And that's, interestingly, with the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications and the Arts. And that is the news.
Yes, and like I said, after a little bit of glitch, and that's the power and wonder of technology, isn't it? Our listeners will never know. Internet dropped out, computer shut down, and it's the next day that we took over. But here we are, a mere brief little second in podcast time. But the end of the news, and I know you've got that stupendously amazing, stellar interview coming up with awesome crime writer too. I love a little bit of mystery and crime.
Ashley Kalagian Blunt.
So should we just maybe step into the cafe for a quick little sip on a non-alcoholic beverage? We are in a cafe. We do have the Writers' Lounge coming up. And, just relax a bit before the wonderful interview.
Sounds good. Let's go.
I'll meet you in there. So, Veronica, what is your beverage of choice for episode 80?
Well, it is a lazy afternoon. I'm thinking that just a nice cup of tea would be fine, just to chat about books. Really, that's kind of suits me. So I'm going to go a cup of chai. What about you?
Well, it is episode 80, which means we are into the 80s, and so I'm going to be that annoying cafe customer, and I'm going to ask if they've got good old-fashioned English toffee, because that is, I don't drink a lot of milk drinks, but I do remember that one from when I was a kid, and I don't think, I can't remember seeing it anymore, so yes, and I've managed to convince the lovely staff in my underground bunker cafe that they pulled out the English toffee. But I thought I would take this opportunity, a quick little cafe today, but I did want to spotlight a couple of new additions to the website, the Australian Book Lovers website, of course.
Yep.
And the first one is a young adult book by author Zena Shapter, and the book is called When Dark Roots Hunt. So it is explained as follows. Don't go out onto the lake. Wian trees search the shallows to spear passing prey with their roots. Giant water ants hunt anything that moves on the water skin. Sala's village survives hidden behind a wall of poisonous ivy because everyone agrees, don't go out onto the lake. But then a strange comet crosses the night sky, throwing Sala and her pet pointer into a race through a wine-infested swampland that has her risking it all, unearthing long-hidden truths and stirring rivalries into a terrifying conflict set to change the world of Palud forever. Sala must do whatever it takes to face the truth of who she is, to save her village, to save her family, and to save herself. If only they had listened. And that is When Dark Roots Hunt by author Zena Shapter, which you'll find brand new listing under our young adult genre. I love the idea of a comet coming across the sky and then strange things happening. Always a perfect way to basically say all the rules are going out the window now. Flash a light in a dark sky and anything goes. Now, when it comes to fantasy, this is a title that, as you could probably guess when you hear it, grabbed my attention straight away. It is High Clowder Cats by author Ruby Knight. So the cover's pretty cool too, and I have to admit, I'll let you have a look later, Veronica, and but you might find that the wonderful model cat on the cover of High Clowder Cats does actually look a little bit like Bobby. A little bit, which is pretty funny, yes. So High Clowder Cats is described as follows. Bushy Tail is abandoned as a kit and is doing his best to survive when he meets the enigmatic Bristle, who urges him to learn the 3 rules. Will he ever master them? He had better. The future of cat kind depends on him. So a short, sharp, sweet little, synopsis, but it does have a little bit of fur and a little bit of claws. High Clowder Cats by Ruby Knight, which you'll find under our fantasy. I love the names, Bushy Tail and Bristle. And the future of cat kind depends on him. So, yes, there you go. So a couple of books to spotlight, because I know we've got the huge interview coming up. So what have you been reading, Veronica?
Well, what have I been reading? So I'm up to 43 books for 2023, 43 of my 125 books. So I think I'm about 8 ahead, which is good. The last one I finished was Seer of Seven Waters by Juliet Marilia. Now, Juliet is one of those Kiwis that we kind of claim as our own. I think she actually lives in Perth these days, and she writes beautiful, often Irish-based fantasy books, and just love that. So Seer of Seven Waters is done. I listened to White Cat by Holly Black, which was just amazing. And you talk about cats, you will love this one, Darren. And sadly, I've now got to wait because I hire them from the library, and book 2, somebody's got it out, and I might not be able to get that until June, so that's a bit tragic. Not finished Mark Lawrence's trilogy with Holy Sister, which was also good. Did I tell you about the Greg Beck's one, Beneath the Dark Ice, let me get that right, which he's an Australian author. And I think when I was chatting with Ashley, I started to say that I'm really getting a lot of interest in women's crime writers and thriller writers and that kind of thing. But tell you what, Greg has absolutely got me in. So there's monsters underneath the Antarctic ice, military stuff, there's spies, there's augmented things happening. So yeah, loved it. It was just sort of edge of your seat thing. I did have a kind of a sleepless night and thought, I'll just listen to the audio book, because you can put the audio on for just 10 minutes and then it fades out. But of course, why would I put a thriller on in the middle of the night to try and get some sleep? That did not work at all. The other one that I just do want to mention is Memories Die, which is by one of our authors, and you can actually find this one on the Australian Book Lovers website. This is by one of our authors, Pauline Yates. So stay tuned and I will have a review of it very soon, but that was amazing. Excellent. Again, looking at the bioengineering stuff, so yeah, really good.
Well, I think you might reach 100 books before we get to 100 episodes.
I think you could be right. I do just love reading. Yeah, it is great. But yeah, lots of really good things. And I'm currently reading Stephen King's On Writing, brushing up on that again for the course that I'm doing. I think I mentioned that with the Australian Writers Centre, Write Your Novel. So I'm trying to do my homework on that as well. So yeah, there you go. Writers Cafe. I finished my cuppa. I think it's time to leave the cafe and get into the interview.
Well, I think so. I think crime and mystery, that is definitely something worth stepping out and dropping. I'll leave the rest of my English toffee for next time. But quickly...
was it too hot?
No, I'll because it's hard to find, so I'm going to save that one. No, but speaking of mysteries and cats, here's a real true mystery. So there was this new product that popped up, and it's chicken and tuna Kievs for cats.
Oh.
So they come in like individual little packets, and each packet has like 4 or 5 of these little Kievs.
Right.
And I went, wow, okay, this is the full luxury. So I grabbed a box of them, like, you know, as you get them.
Yeah.
And I opened it up, poured it in a Bobby's bowl, thinking I am going to be rock star here. Yeah. And he sniffed it and just like basically said, "You got to be kidding me." I was like, "What the hell?" So then I took some to work, and there's another guy there he's got 4 cats or something.
Yeah.
So, try these. I'm curious.
Yeah.
And they all snubbed their nose.
Oh.
So I've got one more work colleague coming. I'm finding out tomorrow if her cat liked them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is a mystery there. Why would a company release something that looks so slick and fantastic that doesn't actually entice the animals? So
suspicious.
Yeah, suspicious, or is it some sort of tracking devices that they're trying to get to cat owners? Who knows? I don't know. But no, you're right. Let's jump into the wonderful opportunity you had.
Yes.
All right, let's go.
So now that we have left the cafe, Darren, it is time for this absolutely amazing. I really love the interview with the thriller, dark, psychological thriller, Ashley Kalagian Blunt, where we talk about her book Dark Mode and other books that she wrote, including your connection to the assassination that you talked about and the Armenian genocide.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. So without further
synchronicity in life again.
Indeed. Let's jump into the interview and I'll see you on the other side. Book lovers, welcome to another brilliant author interview, and we have with us today the psychological thriller author, and I must say I'm getting to talk to a few of our crime thriller authors in Australia, and it is really growing on me, this genre. So welcome to Ashley Kalagian Blunt.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are most welcome. Now, Ashley, I'm down here in Victoria on Wurundjeri, on Woiwurrung country. Who are the traditional owners where you are today?
I am on Gadigal land, which is part of the Eora Nation.
Ah, very good. I hear the ABC, often their news is on Gadigal country, so Sydney side is very good.
And we've talked about the weather because, Sydney, Melbourne weather, there's usually a little bit of to and fro. But let's leave that because the listeners are much more interested in your stories. You've had 3 stories. Dark Mode, which is your fabulous psychological thriller, is not your first book. Tell us a little bit about the first book that you put out.
My first book is called My Name is Revenge, and it is a collection of fiction and essays. Mm-hmm. The fiction is a thriller novella. So interestingly, actually, I think my crime roots did start there.
Ah, yes.
That book is about the historical connections between Australia and the Armenian genocide. And there's probably a lot more than you would first suspect. There's a lot more connections than most people realize, and they're really, really fascinating. My great-grandparents were survivors of the Armenian genocide, so I began researching that when I was about 26 years old. I decided I wanted to write about it, and I ended up spending 9 years working on that book, and it went through a lot of iterations, but I interviewed 140 people on 3 continents, including during the 2 months that I spent traveling in Armenia. Wow. And I wrote 2 master's theses as well. And I ended up publishing this book that is, if you ever see the book, it's very, very slim. It's only about 25,000 words.
Right. How does it feel to have 9 years contained in 25,000 words?
That's a great question. I'm incredibly proud of that book because I had a full length book. Actually, Veronica, you'll love this. The first draft of that book was 200,000 words. Because at that time I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew what I was doing because I had taken creative writing courses in university, and I'd been a lifelong reader. And I'd won short story awards. So I thought I know how to write a book. And then I sat down and wrote this 200,000 word behemoth that had no structure, and there was lots of interesting stuff in there, but it didn't work as a book. Yeah. So then I took a number of years and I reworked that draft. I got manuscript assessments and I worked it down to 75,000 words, an actual, a functional manuscript. And then it started winning, not winning. I wish it started getting shortlisted for unpublished manuscript awards.
Right.
And publishers started requesting to read it, which was huge. But then the feedback I got from Australian publishers was, the writing is good, but we can't sell a book on Armenia. There's just not enough interest in it. And so then I took a step away from that manuscript. I started working on other projects. I wrote another nonfiction manuscript that was a memoir that also is not published. And I also enrolled in a master's of research in creative writing. And that's when I wrote the novella that's in that book, because the novella is about this wave of terrorism that happened around the world in the 1970s and 80s related to the denial of the Armenian genocide. And 2 of those attacks took place here in Australia. One in Melbourne, a bombing in 1986 in South Yarra, and the other was an assassination here in Sydney in December 1980 that's still unsolved to this day. There's $1 million reward out for information about who committed this assassination of the Turkish consul general and his bodyguard. And so I thought, okay, if I start from this assassination, Australians have to be interested in that because it happened right
because it happened on our shores. Yes, yeah, absolutely,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write that from the point of view of the terrorists, because when I started learning about this terrorism, there's not a lot written about it, which is crazy to me. When I started learning about this terrorism, I realized that the motivations for these terrorists to be setting bombs and assassinating people was the exact same motivation I had for writing the book I was working on, which was that the denial of the genocide and the legacy of the genocide, needs to be redressed by modern day politicians and modern day citizens. And it was so unnerving to see that deeply into the mind of someone committing such extreme violence. Yeah. And so I wrote the novella from the point of view of one of these terrorists. And I did that as part of my master's degree because I was a bit intimidated about trying to do that on my own.
Fantastic support and great opportunity. For listeners, the blurb is a heartfelt and gripping story of family, hardship and resilience. So with the background we've just heard from Ashley, on the 17th of December 1980 at 9:47, two men shot the Turkish Consul General to Sydney and his bodyguard near the consul's home in Vaucluse. The assassins aimed, fired and vanished. This is a literary thriller novella set in 1980 Sydney and drawn from true events, including a series of international terrorist attacks. My Name is Revenge is the story of a young man seeking justice. So there you go. And it was a finalist in the 2018 Carmel Bird Digital Literary Award and shortlisted for the 2019 Woollahra Digital Literary Award. So yeah, congratulations. That sounds like it just had to be written.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and to answer your original question, it feels amazing to have gotten it out into the Australian public. And when people read that book, it's so often they come to me and they say afterwards, I can't believe no one ever taught me about this, because that history is so fundamental to how the rest of the 20th century history played out, especially the Holocaust of World War II. It would not have happened the way it did if not for the Armenian genocide, which was really the blueprints for it. So it's this incredibly important piece of world history and all these fascinating ties to Australia, like I said, and we just don't know about it.
Now, what did your grandparents, were they still with you when they saw the book come out?
No, they had died when I was quite young. Yeah, they had died when I was quite young. But my family was wonderful. Like I went and stayed. Part of why I was so interested in this was that I didn't grow up with my Armenian family, so they all live near Niagara Falls in Canada. But my dad was in the military, so we grew up sort of far away from them. So I'd gone and, when I started researching this book, I sort of moved in with my grandmother and I was like, okay, because it was my great-grandparents who survived the genocide. Right. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to interview everybody. So I spent a month talking about my family. They were amazing. They were wonderful.
That's good, because it could have been, bringing up a lot of deep-seated trauma to hear about these things. Yeah.
I think my great-grandmother, she had been quite young when the genocide happened. And I mean, young enough that she didn't remember anything. Okay. And so she made it a point to talk about it. Whereas my great-grandfather was the opposite. He had witnessed not just his entire family, but his entire village slaughtered, and was the only person to survive that. And he never, ever, ever spoke about it until he was in his old age. And then he started to have, my great-grandmother died first, unfortunately, and he started to have these terrible nightmares that the Turks were chasing him and were going to kill him. And so that's when it really started to, his story really started to come out. So I think the family was really glad to have someone writing it down, because there's all these details from your family, and I'm sure this is the same with everyone's family history. There's details that everybody thinks that someone in the family knows, and then when you go to retrieve those details, and this was true with the names of the villages that they were from in Anatolia, which is now eastern Turkey. My family was like, oh, go ask this aunt, go ask your cousin, go, this person will have it written down somewhere. No, those details are gone forever.
The trouble is, of course, even with the digital these days, it's so easy for that to be altered and changed and deleted as well. So really good to have it written down in a book and in a hard copy and, available for people to share. Yeah, fantastic. Then you kind of went a little bit lighter after that that catharsis, I guess, because your next book is How to Be Australian. So here's the blurb, listeners. When Ashley persuades her new husband, Steve, to leave snowy Canada and join her for a year down under, she looks forward to an easy transition. After all, Australia's just Canada with more sunshine and strange animals, right? But they soon discover things aren't so simple. Steve struggles to settle, and Ashley fears he will come to regret both the move and the marriage, especially after she loses her wedding rings on Bondi Beach. Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, it really was.
Oh, baffled, homesick, and increasingly anxious in a land renowned for no worries, she's preparing to return to Canada when Steve shockingly announces that he wants to stay in Australia. For the sake of her marriage and her happiness, Ashley must find an Australia she can belong to. She decides to travel the country, learn its history, decode its cultural quirks, and connect with as many residents as she can meet. How to Be Australian is a remarkable memoir, at once familiar and far away, that shines a fresh, funny and fascinating light onto the country we think we know. It's an outsider's view on life and love down under. Where did that come from? Did you feel like enough about everybody else, time to talk about me?
That's a great question. I think I was at that time more interested in writing memoir, and I've always really loved comedy. Like I've always loved comedy in all its forms. You know, I was in a sketch comedy troupe when I was in university, and I did improv when I was in high school. And I'd also, around the time I was working on that, first working on How to Be Australian, I started doing stand-up comedy, and I just fell in love with it. Like I loved it. Like, even when nobody laughed, I loved it. So I had written, so as I said, I'd written my Armenia manuscript, wasn't getting anywhere with that. I lived in Korea, Peru, and Mexico before moving to Australia, and I'd worked in all three countries. And so, but my husband and I had sort of lived this like real life rom-com arc, like this like really perfect rom-com arc. So I tried to write that memoir, and I'd sent it to this manuscript assessor I was working with, Claire Scobie. And at the end, she put this comment that just offhandedly, she just said, "Oh, you know, this was really entertaining. Your next book could be about Australia." And I thought, when I saw that, I thought, I don't have that much to say. I don't have a book's worth of things to say about Australia. But then I realized, you know, I was having all these conversations with friends and other expats and migrants, and I was like, you know, maybe I should just keep some notes just in case I want to write this Australia book. And this was at the same time that I was getting all these rejections for the Armenia book and being told, like, we can't sell a book about Armenia in Australia. Australians aren't interested in that. So in my head, I was like, well, what would Australians be interested in if not their own country? So I started collecting notes, and one day I realized I had something crazy, like 20,000 words of notes in this Word doc. And I thought, okay, like maybe this is worth trying to write as a memoir. And yeah, I started writing that. And what's interesting about How to Be Australian is it started as a collection of essays. So it wasn't even supposed to be that much about me. It was supposed to be about like, here's all these really weird things about Australia. And hey, Aussies maybe don't realize how weird it is here. Because it was, my intended audience for it was Australians. Like obviously migrants and tourists are going to get a lot out of it, but like I really wanted it's really a love letter to Australians. And so I wrote all the funny bits while I was doing the stand-up, and then I got very, very sick, and luckily I was in the middle of that project. And so when I was well enough to start working again, because this, you know, I'm still sick 6 years later, but I'm gradually recovering. So when I was well enough to start working, you know, in like little 15-minute windows every few days, I was in the middle of this project that I really loved. But what I found was I couldn't write comedy anymore. Like I just couldn't be funny. And so all the heartfelt bits of that book were written after I got sick.
From there, it became really the memoir, and Steve with a starring role.
Yes, my husband Steve, he doesn't exactly appreciate that he has a starring role.
So I need to know: did you find your wedding rings?
No, we didn't. It was really sad. I'd taken them off to put sunscreen on, and I'd put them down, and then we'd got up and walked away. And I realized within like 5 minutes, and we rushed back, and we knew exactly where we had been sitting because there'd been like this big magenta tent right beside us. Yeah. And we were like trying to find them. And then there was a guy with a metal detector, and we asked for his help. But they were just gone. I think someone had grabbed them. But the thing that makes me the thing that makes it kind of okay in my mind is that when we got engaged, my husband and I had asked, I didn't want a diamond. I felt like a diamond was a silly thing. So I said, instead of a diamond, could you please get me a cubic zirconia, and could you please take the money you would have given for a diamond and donate it to the children that I was volunteering with when I lived in Peru, so they could have doctor's appointments and eyeglasses and dentist appointments and those kind of things.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing.
So someone took these rings and thought that they'd like got this,
thought that they'd
significant
scored,
diamond.
in fact, but no, they're going to be surprised. Okay.
No, there was real gold, sadly, but
Yeah.
at least it wasn't the multi-$1,000 diamond that they thought they were getting.
And what a lovely thing to do to support the work that you've been doing in Peru.
I just really wanted to, like, and now whenever I look, because I got replacement rings, luckily, so whenever I look at my rings, I think about like that we were able to do something bigger than ourselves. Like that was really what I wanted, like that to symbolize.
Fantastic. And with the traveling, do you think that your childhood chasing your dad around with the military led to the itchy feet, or is it something that you think you would have done anyway?
I think definitely my dad, we were always moving. And so I never felt a sense of belonging anywhere. And I think, school kids are mean. And so all the school kids made it clear to me that I didn't belong, wherever I'd rocked up, I didn't belong there. And I think my mom also, so I come from 2 generations of dislocation because my mom's dad was also military and she moved even more than I did. I really wonder if I had grown up, I've never lived in the same city as any of my family, other than briefly when I got married, my parents were in the same city. But other than that, like I've never lived with any of my cousins or aunts or uncles. And I really wonder if it would have been different if I had like that sense of connection and that sense of community in a place.
And you've lived now in Sydney. You mentioned this is the longest you've lived anywhere. Do you feel a sense of connection to Sydney?
I do, actually. Yeah, I've lived in Sydney longer than any other city in the world. And I particularly love Sydney. It is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And generally speaking, the climate here is so livable, especially compared to minus 40 degrees Celsius in Winnipeg. But also I think it brought, more broadly speaking, in Australia, I have developed this huge sense of connection and community with the writing community and the reading community. And I have, some of the best friends now that I've ever had in my life. And I have friends all across Australia. Like I can go to any city in Australia and I know people. And it's just this real sense of, rootedness, I think, that I feel. And and I wrote an article, I'd been struggling for years to get that Armenia book published. And I got to the point where I realized, maybe I just don't have the talent. Like maybe I don't have the skills to do this, and I'm not going to be an author professionally. But at that point, I had made so many good friends and had so many rewarding experiences through the writing community that I knew I was going to keep writing and being involved with that for the rest of my life. Because to me, I realized that's actually what it's really about, is it's about that sense of connection and like the deep rewarding feeling you get when someone engages with your work and your ideas. So and then a couple of years later, I did end up getting published, and I realized, it's not like talent and skills continue to improve the longer you are dedicated to improving them. Yeah. So really, if you want to pursue that path, it's just a matter of, well, how tenacious are you willing to be and how patient can you be? Yeah,
fantastic. And I think that the Australian literary community is amazingly supportive.
They're incredible. Yeah, I feel so lucky.
Yeah. Your favourite book as a child kind of points the way to where you're writing now. So tell us about that.
I loved Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and I was obsessed with, all of the original hardcovers in the yellow and blue hardcover series, and then the new paperbacks. And I think one of my absolute favorites was when they had the Nancy Drew's Hardy Boys crossover, that first book.
Yes,
because to me, they lived in the same world. Like it was like, of course they're going to meet up and interact.
There you go. So do you think you learned any of your skills as a thriller writer by reading Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That sense of there's something going on and it's the protagonist's role to figure out what it is. And the suspense and the tension that come with that. But also I love the cleverness of crime narratives. Like I love how they generally reveal something about how the world works that in our everyday lives, we may not realize is happening.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's just happening routinely to ordinary people. So here we have your, favourite book's a thriller. You're now living in Sydney, and together I'm going to tell the listeners about the blurb for Dark Mode. The subline is, once you're online, there's nowhere to hide. So is it paranoia or is someone watching? For years, Reagan Carson has kept her life offline. No socials, no internet presence, no photos. Safe. Until the day she stumbles on a shocking murder in a Sydney laneway. The victim looks just like her. Coincidence? As more murders shake the city and she's increasingly drawn out from hiding, Reagan is forced to confront her greatest fear. She's been found. A riveting psychological thriller drawn from true events, Dark Mode delves into the terrifying reality of the dark web and the price we pay for surrendering our privacy one click at a time. I think you're playing on a lot of people's fears here. So where did the idea come from to put Dark Mode together?
A lot of separate strands came together into Dark Mode. I think one of the key ones was the dark web plot. And that happened because I lost my driver's license, and I lost it within a block of my apartment because I'd gone to the post office to, pick up a package.
Yep.
And I'd put my driver's license in my pocket because you have to show ID. And when I got home, it wasn't there. And so I went back out and looked for it, and I couldn't find it. And so someone could have picked that driver's license up off the street, looked at the address, and put it in my mailbox, which was right there. But instead what they did was they took it, and either that person who found it or someone they knew put my details on the dark web. And the way I found that out was that the very next morning, I went and logged into the back end of my author website, and it was just flooded with traffic from China and Russia and Ukraine. And I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And so when I did some research, I realized that what all those clues add up to is that someone had posted my license on a spreadsheet where they sell identity details, and identity details are more valuable the more complete they are. So people were, and these hackers work in groups. So they would have been looking for my email, my phone number, other things to complete the information that's not on my driver's license. So yeah, that was really upsetting.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I got really interested in the dark web.
How easy is it to find the dark web? Because it always seems like a kind of fantasy to me. It feels like, oh yes, it's on the TV shows and it's this, that, and the other, and Australian security forces, yeah, they must know all about it. But obviously, it's kind of easy. It's just there.
Well, it's a little bit trickier than just logging onto any other website because you have to download special software.
Right.
And then if you want to go on the dark web, you really do need to do some research about how to do it safely because if you're on the dark web, you could potentially exposing yourself to, if you click on a link on the dark web, you're potentially exposing yourself to viruses and phishing and all kinds of things. So you need to, I think, be a bit more tech savvy, slightly more tech savvy than the average user is. And I say that because I consider myself quite an average, computer or internet user. And it was, I've been on it, and it was a little bit challenging to just make sure I was doing it safely. And then once you get on the dark web, though, here's the thing. The dark web itself, because of all the layers of encryption, it just looks like internet in 1999. There's no graphics. It's all white text on a black background.
Right.
And it's really slow. So it's kind of like time travel.
How much research did you have to do to bring the book to life, I guess is the thing? Because obviously you're a great researcher, having done, 9 years on your first piece of literature. So how much for this book?
Well, quite a lot, but quite a lot of it was passive research. And I think the reason I ended up writing this book is that, as I said, I got sick. In 2017, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I spent 2 years largely bedbound. It was very, very difficult for me to get up physically and leave the apartment. I was still managing to get into my job a couple mornings a week because they were very wonderful to me and gave me that flexibility so that, because I'd lost everything else in my life, everything else in my life was gone. So they kept me on as an employee, working on some little projects when I could. That meant that I had a lot of time, and some of that time I was too sick to even follow a narrative, so I couldn't listen to an audiobook, I couldn't watch a TV show. But when I was well enough to passively intake information, I listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of true crime podcasts, and I watched all the true crime documentaries on Netflix. I watched every single episode of Law & Order Special Victims Unit in order.
I think that is absolutely amazing. So do you hear boom boom in your head all the time?
I watched those all in 1 year. Like that was my big project for the first year I was sick, was watching. Because at that time my husband was going to the library to get the DVDs from the library. Oh
goodness, yeah.
So a lot of the early research for the book came from having all of these crime narratives sort of composting in my brain. And then when I decided specifically what Dark Mode was going to be about, I did research into the dark web. I also did a lot of research into the Black Dahlia murder. So that was a murder that took place in Los Angeles in 1947. A woman named Elizabeth Short, who was an aspiring actress. She had moved to the city to pursue an acting career, and also she wanted to be a mom. She wanted to get married and have kids, and she got murdered. And her body was found. I won't get too graphic, but her body was found in a suburban neighborhood, and she'd been bisected at the waist, and posed very specifically. And I know crime TV and movies make it seem like that's really common, but actually in real life, less than 1% of murder victims are posed in a way that is designed to be demonstrative of something. And so she and not only was she posed, but there were all these particular wounds on her body. Basically, her body had been used effectively as a canvas, and I think that's one of the reasons why this murder is so famous. It's also still technically unsolved, and also because of her nickname, the Black Dahlia. And it's unclear whether that nickname was something that she experienced it while she was alive, or that was given to her after death by the media. But that I think the nickname is just so catchy. You hear that once and you're just like, oh, what is that about? So I did a lot of research because the deeper you go into that case, the more fascinating it is. And there's all these people who've dedicated years and years of their life to solving it and have written books about it. And there's podcast series, and there's TV shows, and there's movies. And James Ellroy wrote a book about it. And it's just you can spend the rest of your life researching that case. So that was something that was also of particular interest to me. And then I wove in a lot of details from other various true crime cases.
Having had hours and hours of research, I think that would come a little bit more naturally to you.
Thank you.
Now, you mentioned in some of the material that we did in the preparation that creativity supports wellness, and I absolutely believe that. And with your chronic illness, have you found that, you've just mentioned as you slowly were able to take in some passive information, and then what triggers were you able to use to help you get a little bit more creativity into your life and to bring yourself back to more wellness? Because I know that this is, chronic fatigue is not something that goes away, but it's something that you learn to manage a bit.
Well, interestingly, actually, in most cases, chronic fatigue syndrome does go away. And this is one of the things that I didn't realize. I didn't realize that it's a common myth about it. But then when I was diagnosed with it, the doctor said, look, on average, it takes 3 to 5 years. And, some people only get back to about 90%, but some people get back to 100%. They said on the outset would be 10 years. So because I didn't get as sick, I was quite sick, but I didn't get as sick as some people get. Some people end up, the light is intolerable, sound is intolerable, touch is intolerable. So they end up just in a room, just, unable to do, it's kind of like a waking coma. It's horrendous. I didn't get that sick, thankfully. So I thought, 3 to 5 years, I'll be fine. Anyways,
good, yep.
I'm 6 years in, and I'm definitely making good progress. So I guess I'm one of the outliers at 10. Some people do end up sick for their whole lives, and what the doctors told me was that generally means there's something else underlying that perhaps they just can't identify.
Yeah.
But to answer your question about creativity and wellness, I felt exceptionally lucky that I had developed a creative practice. By the time I got sick, I'd spent more than 5 years investing in developing a creative practice. And luckily that creative practice was something that I could do at home, alone, in the quiet, on my own schedule, because that was the only thing I could do. Like I couldn't go out, I couldn't handle a lot of noise, I couldn't stand up. When I had a little bit of energy, I could go back into that manuscript that I was halfway through, and I could play around in it. And I think partly because I was working on How to Be Australian, and it was it's a much more lighthearted project. I think it really did help me. It gave me a purpose that was bigger than myself, and it gave me some efficacy. Like I was able to see the progress I was making on that manuscript, and it ended up getting a publishing contract in late 2019 and was published, unfortunately, in June 2020, right during the pandemic. But it was still really rewarding to have it published.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to see those books and be able to hold the paperback in your hand is incredibly wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Let's dive into dark mode specific just a little bit. And apparently the protagonist, Reagan, owns a nursery of unusual and deadly plants. I love that. So tell us a little bit about why that's in the novel and how it works for Reagan and for the story.
So if you've seen the cover of Dark Mode, you'll have seen that there's these peculiar plants on the cover. They did a fantastic job with the cover. So Reagan, she's a mid-20s woman living in Sydney. She owns this little boutique garden center. She's had some problems in her past, and she's got trust issues because of that. They're very well justified trust issues. And she just finds plants easier to understand, easier to relate to. You give a plant water, you give a plant nutrients, you give a plant sunlight, and it will grow and blossom, whereas she doesn't understand what people need from her or what she needs from them. So she just feels safer with plants. But she's gotten into really different and unique plants. There's so many plants out there, and she finds marigolds and daisies just a little bit ordinary. She's into different plants. So on the cover, the center piece of the cover is this voodoo lily, and that's because her garden center is named Voodoo Lily Garden Center. And a voodoo lily is this particular kind of lily. It's got this one large purple blossom, and it when it flowers, it smells like rotting flesh, like it smells like a corpse. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is why a lot of people don't have them in their homes.
Yeah.
But the reason it does that is not for any insidious purpose. It's that smell attracts carrion flies, and the carrion flies are the insects that pollinate these particular flowers. Right. So there's actually a variety of corpse flowers. There's one that's called a corpse flower. And actually, there was a huge corpse flower that just flowered in Cairns.
Yes,
Botanic Garden in Cairns.
I saw the news,
Yeah, and again, same thing. It gives off this smell of rotting flesh to attract a particular kind of insect.
Gross, but interesting, yes.
And so you asked what the plants do in the narrative. So Reagan will oftentimes refer to different plants throughout the narrative, and I've used this as a device to create tension and atmosphere. So one of the first things she mentions, so in the first chapter, she finds the body of a woman who's been murdered, and this woman's body, she's been left in the exact same pose as the Black Dahlia victim of 1947. So that's how I've tied those cases together. But so when Reagan sees her, she immediately thinks of corpse flower. Like she thinks of like the smell is like, oh my gosh, like corpse flower. And then later in that chapter, it's set during a particularly hot and dry summer in Sydney. And one of the facts I learned, and this was one of the things that started me down this route of including all these strange plants, is I learned that when plants are in need of water, they emit an extremely high frequency sound. So effectively, the plants are screaming. We just can't hear it because it's outside the range of human hearing. And scientists don't exactly know why they do this. They're not sure if the plants are signaling to each other or what's going on. But I just love this idea of, you're walking through the city and the plants around you are screaming.
Yeah. Oh, that is spooky. The interesting thing about plants and fungus and bacteria and all sorts of things that's happening, of course, we're watching The Last of Us on the streaming services about people being taken over by mushrooms. And now you're telling me that the plants are screaming. And I've just been reading in Claire Coleman's book, Lies, Damn Lies, that plants can be eating CDs. There's a bacteria that eats CDs. So, our data could be...
Oh, I didn't know about the CDs.
Yes. Yeah, amazing. So we think that they're beautiful. And I love my garden, but now I'm just going to be perhaps a little bit more careful about how I treat them. I'm going to talk to them even more. I do already talk to them and look after them, but that is amazing. There you go, listeners. If you want to dive into the dark side of plants, Dark Mode has what you need. And another one that I'm really interested in is the female friendship in crime novels. So I mentioned some of the novelists that I've been reading. So Petronella McGovern, Danuka Mackenzie, and the strong female characters that are in there, the greater focus on female friendship in crime novels and all that exploration. So tell me about Reagan. So even though she has trust issues, tell us about how that works into the story without giving away any spoilers, of course.
Sure, of course. Yeah. So Reagan has one very close friend, and her name is Minley Chase, and she is Korean Australian. And they met so Reagan and Min, they met when they both went and lived in Korea. And so they're both from Sydney, and they both ended up at the same time in this small Korean village. They were both teaching English there. And of course, they quickly discovered that they were both from the same city and around the same age, and that they were both, two of the only people who were fluent English speakers in this sort of remote village in Korea, which is somewhat based on my own time in Korea. Mm-hmm. I spent a year living there teaching English. I was in a satellite city of Seoul. I was not in a tiny village, but I knew people who were. But I did find that I formed these very, very intense friendships. And this was the same, whenever I moved to a country where the English wasn't the main language. Mm-hmm. I lived in Peru and Mexico as well, is that when you find other people who you can communicate fluently with, you just develop these much more intense friendships. And also you're away from home, you're away from all your networks. And when I was moving, of course, this was before social media. So you could email people, but yes, you weren't online with people all the time. So you were sort of, I think it's so different now because you never fully are extracted from your life and community in the way it used to be when you moved overseas. Mm-hmm. So they formed this very, very intense friendship in Korea. And this all happens, before the book starts. And when they come back to Sydney, of course, they're still friends, but they have very, very different lives and they're very, very different people. And now they sort of are still, it's been a few years and they're still sort of figuring out how does this friendship work now that our lives are in such different places. That's really one of the primary, their relationship is the primary relationship in Dark Mode is their friendship. Mm-hmm. And how what is happening to Reagan is affecting their friendship. And I did, as you mentioned, there's this fantastic turn to female-led crime narratives. And I just felt, I've read so much crime over the years, and it's so often male-led, and it's so often, if there's friendship as a center as opposed to romance, it's often male friendship, but it's generally romance. And I just really wanted to showcase these two women and their deep love for each other, but mm-hmm. also their challenges as adults. I think friendship is incredibly challenging, and often it's portrayed in pop culture as, being two people are best friends, and so they'll do anything for each other, and that's the end of the story. And I think this friendship is so much more complex than that.
And I think most friendships are, so that rings absolutely true. Excellent. You've got the book coming out on the 1st of March. What's next then? So, there'll be the flurry and there'll be the months of chatting and going to, book festivals and signings and all those things, which is great to look forward to. And then what other creative projects have you got on your cards for the next 12 months?
Well, I feel very lucky that I turned to crime writing. So I think I spent years, trying different things as a writer. And I always loved thrillers, like going back to Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. And like when I was a teenager, I read everything John Grisham had written up to that point in time. I've always loved crime, but I think I was always afraid to try to write it because I felt like, oh, you need to know so much about how investigations work and the criminal justice system and like what causes crime and like what motivates criminals. And I just felt like I think so many crime books are so brilliant and they're so intricate, like the pieces of them are so intricate. And I just thought, I can't do that. So I think, getting sick obviously was extremely bad luck, but it also gave me the time to just spend hundreds of hours learning about crime and investigations and police work and the justice system. And I feel like that has set me up. I loved writing dark mode, and I really now want to define myself as a psychological thriller writer, as a crime writer. I am contracted for another psychological thriller, which I'm working on and very excited about.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do. I want to write 20 or 30 books in this genre.
Okay, 20 or 30. Small goals for you, Ashley.
That's the goal.
But I think prolific is often associated with crime writing. It's almost as though when you find either your protagonist or your detective or, you're not a template, but when you find the tropes that kind of work for you, because we love our tropes, I think, in crime writing, then, you just take them on I like the way they have the sort of the second arc, which is the people, even though they're still solving the crime or the murder, whatever is happening at the time.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. We can look forward to many more psychological thrillers coming from Ashley Kalagian Blunt.
Thank you so much, Veronica. This has been such a pleasure.
No worries at all. So where can people find you on the web and on social media? Because, of course, you are online, unlike Reagan, who's, taken herself off.
Yes. Yes, I'm very much not like Reagan. I'm much more like Min, actually. Min and I are much more on the same page.
There you go.
You can visit my website, ashleyKalagianBlunt.com. I have a monthly newsletter where I do book giveaways and I share my upcoming events and courses because I do a lot of teaching in creative writing. I also am on Instagram and would love to connect with you there. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter a little less frequently, but I am there, so you can find me there. And I love to hear from readers, so please get in touch.
Very good. Now, I forgot to mention, I mentioned early on that you are also a podcast host. So tell us quickly about James and Ashley Stay at Home. Where did that start?
James and Ashley Stay at Home is a podcast about writing, creativity, and health, which I co-host with James Mackenzie Watson, who is the author of Denizen, which won the Penguin Literary Award in 2021 and came out last year and is fantastic, like just one of the best books I've ever read. And I would say that even if I wasn't good friends with James. But James also lives with chronic illness. He joined my writers group in 2016, maybe. And we became good friends because we could relate to what each other was experiencing, both with the writing and with the illness. And we started our podcast to speak to other writers and creatives who also live with a variety of health issues and challenges. And we look at that intersection of creativity and health. And it's so fascinating because we've had, such a range of people on the podcast and some really incredible conversations. So it's been a real joy getting to do that.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's fairly regular. You've got 70-odd episodes, kind of, keeping pace with Australian book lovers, which is lovely. The more words out there about writing, the better, I think.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, we need to share all the incredible work that our authors, particularly our Australian authors, are doing.
Yes, yeah, so much going on. Now, any final words for readers or writers? What would you like to tell the readers, perhaps, first of all?
I set out to write dark mode I'm a big fan of Candace Fox, of Tana French, of J.P. Pomeroy, and I really set out to create that same sense of being fast-paced and high tension, and just a book that you just couldn't put down. And I hope that's what I've achieved with Dark Mode. So if that's the kind of book you enjoy, I wrote Dark Mode for you, and I really hope it grabs you.
Excellent. And what about writers?
Well, writers. I have tons of resources on my website for writers. And I teach, like I said, I teach regularly. I teach a generative creative writing workshop on Zoom. That's really fun. We just do different generative exercises. And I teach memoir. I teach creative nonfiction. I teach scene structure and microplotting. So if you're a writer and you're looking to improve your craft, I would love to see you in an upcoming workshop. Excellent.
And they can find all those details on your website?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. All right. So that is Ashley, Ashley, Kalagian, Kalagian, Blunt, BLUNT.com. So jump onto Ashley's website, follow her on all the social medias, but most of all, pre-order Dark Mode, because I think it's going to be an absolute winner.
Oh, thank you so much, Veronica. I appreciate that.
You are most welcome. It has been lovely to chat with you. And that's it, listeners. Back to the podcast. So thank you, Ashley, for an absolutely brilliant interview. Loved having a chat. I'm wishing you all the very best success, and I can see that your book is actually going gangbusters, which is just brilliant. I see you're posting about lots of places that you're sharing some of your work, and I was just amazed that when Ashley talked about that really deep, rewarding feeling that when somebody engages with your work and your ideas, and that sense of, somebody gets it, or, that they kind of understand what you were trying to achieve and they appreciate your art. So, yeah, it was really good, really good.
Yeah, well, obviously it goes without saying, Ashley, thank you so much for being a part of the Australian Book Lovers podcast, and thank you so much for sharing all those wonderful elements about yourself, your writing, and giving so much food for thought. And you're right, Veronica, that was a really cool discussion. And I think, I've been listening to a few things of late and reading a little bit and thinking a little bit about, what it is that keeps us driven, or I guess, especially when it comes to art, or not so much art, but I guess, for want of a better word, a mission, something that keeps us going each day. What are we bringing into the world? Obviously, we have tasks to do, we have chores to attend to, we have responsibility, all that jazz that comes with everyday life. But somewhere in there, for a lot of us, there's that need to bring something else into the world, whatever it might be, in whatever form. And it's a twofold thing. I think there's the joy, satisfaction, and yearning that comes with working on something a little bit every day or every couple of days, whenever you can get to it, where you're becoming a better person, you're becoming more knowledgeable, you're gaining more talent, more skills to whatever craft you might be working on. But then there's that satisfaction when the craft touches other people in the world around you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's I think that's a really beautiful aspect of, because sometimes you can be chipping away at whatever goal you might be trying to achieve, and it can get pretty damn lonely sometimes.
Yeah, and particularly for writers, I think, because they're so often, it is a solitary, it is a solitary activity is the word I'm looking for. So I've had so many words in my brain today. Yeah, it is a solitary activity, and it is really nice to see that somebody has engaged with it. And the other thing that Ashley also talked about was sort of that, the improvement that she noticed in her own writing, and that, talent and skills are something, but tenacity and patience are also a part of, getting your work out there and getting it connected with people. And yeah, I would absolutely have to agree. Some of the things that you put out in your early writing life, you think, they were early. They were a little bit interesting.
Well, you don't think of that at the time, of course.
No, at the time you think it's amazing, and then but when you look back on it, and you can see, if you take some feedback, that people engaging with it doesn't always have to be positive, but you can always take some information back with you. But yeah, I like the thought of leaving a legacy, of leaving something behind you that kind of outlasts you, and books are certainly going to do that.
Yeah, definitely, and especially
Yeah.
with so many different formats now, you know, it's quite normal now to do. When I say normal, it's become just a way of life, a way of reading. Is one option is to listen, and
Yeah.
you know, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. You know, and then you've got different formats of listening. You've got straight author reads, then you've got, you know, sound, you know, pretty much radio style play productions. I know there's ones you can get. It's essentially cinema productions, but just for audio books.
Yeah.
The other thing that I find really interesting is how this new, I wouldn't say new. I mean, even back in 2001, HAL was a bit of a naughty computer, but I think none of us could have predicted how the internet would change the human race and our day-to-day life, shall I say. And way back in the day, you know, when Windows 95 and the internet was still a little bit of a dial-up, even just after that, etc., the concept of a dark web just didn't exist. And so I find that interesting too. There's this whole new realm that's just ripe for stories and intrigue and mystery and suspense that's sort of come out of, that wasn't there 40 years ago, 30 years ago. So another little record scratch there, and technology. Well, you know, we've been pretty lucky. I mean, this is episode 80, so I guess, you know, the decade of success, or should I say excess, it probably kicks off. Everyone was too busy snorting white powder than worrying about keeping our internet connection stable. But there you go. The glitches come, and that's the fun of being on the podcast, especially considering we were just talking about all the wonderful formats that you can leave your legacy now as a writer, whether it be digital, visual, paper, so many different formats, and of course the nemesis that is the dark web, that is a spectre that's looming over it, or should I say looming beneath us all, because it's again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not an evil villain I would have predicted back in the early 80s or early 90s, and yet here it is.
Here it is, and it is a problem in lots of different ways, but we have all of that interest. Thank you very much to Ashley for, again,
Indeed.
a fantastic
Thank
interview.
you.
It was really lovely to chat with you, and still wait for more, listeners, because Ashley gave us a little bit of a reading from the beginning of her book. So and honestly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when she was reading that. I wanted to go, but no, I tried to stay very quiet, so that was just a beautiful reading. So yeah, that is also coming up. All right, so many more things to come. We have the Writers Lounge with a super special guest, but no spoilers there. We'll wait till we get that one done and introduce you to there. We've got another set of tips from the delightful KM Allan. So Kate's recorded some more tips from us from her blog, which is brilliant.
Thank
so
you,
we'll have one of
Kate.
her tips. Thank you, Kate. Excellent. And also we have a very special book review from David. I chat to him about his thoughts on S.S. Turner's The Connection Game. So that's coming up as well. And with all of that, maybe it's time for us to think about some quotes, Darren.
Well, should we do a quote before or after a few drinks in the lounge? I'm happy to break tradition and do it now.
Let's do them now, because then we can finish off afterwards. And I couldn't decide whether I had shared this quote before, because it's from somebody that I do like, another Kiwi writer, Catherine Mansfield, and she's an essay and journalist and was born in 1888. But I really love this one, and I think you will tell me if I've done it before. But given all the talking about the darkness and all those kind of things and the creativity, the quote is, "The mind I love must have wild places, a tangled orchard where dark damsons drop in the heavy grass, an overgrown little wood, the chance of a snake or two, a pool that nobody's fathomed the depth of, and paths threaded with flowers planted by the mind."
It is a very, very good quote, and it is one we've had that doesn't take any of the impact away.
No, it just seems so relevant to what we've been talking about. And I had to look up damsons again because I couldn't remember what they were. So they're plums. That's a European plum. So dark damsons drop in the heavy grass. You know, the overgrown little wood, a snake or two. You know, we've been talking about the dark web, paths threaded with flowers planted by the mind, all that creativity. So yeah, thank you, Catherine Mansfield. A really lovely quote.
And I think there was something in there about the depth of a pool, or
a pool that nobody's fathomed the depth of.
No fathomable depth, which is kind of, well, in a way links to the quote I've chosen today, because listeners, I don't know if this is true or not. I'm not that versed in the dark web, but I have read on more than one occasion that apparently the dark web makes up to 90% of the internet, and that the internet we know of, all the shopping, the social media, our general switch on the computer and surf the www, is literally just a bit of an iceberg on the top of a huge dark sea. So there we go, unfathomable depths. And I'm not going to try and say unfathomable wall again.
It's really hard to say. I had to try and articulate quite clearly.
Unknown meters underwater. But no, my quote comes from Eric Schmidt, and I was inspired by the concept of the dark web and the internet, and the changes that who knows what it's still going to bring for us. But the quote is as follows: "The internet is the first thing that humanity has built that humanity doesn't understand. The largest experiment in anarchy that we have ever had." And that is by Eric Schmidt. And I like that, that we've built something that we don't understand. And it kind of, it's crazy that we can be in that position. But again, we build bombs we don't understand. So that's...
Well, too true.
We play with viruses and bugs and germs we don't understand. So I guess we don't understand should be a T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. I even know how to say that in French. I do not know. It says je ne sais pas. She says she does not know. So there you go.
Oh, there you go.
One of the only French phrases I remember from learning French at school. But there we have it. All right. So what is next on the program, Darren? Where are we off to now?
We are, I know I'm going back to my familiar, well, see, because the bar that I always like, the lounge I always imagine when we go into the Writers' Lounge, mine is down below. And I think that's why I was really encapsulated, I guess you could say, by S.S. Turner's, the concept of seeing, just peeking that little sliver of window past. Because in my little lounge bar, it's eternally dark and smoky, but there is a sliver of light that reminds you, you can just see traffic up the top to remind you that, oops, a little bit drunk, but it is only 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But I say we should go down to the... Would you like... Well, I'll be going down to the Writers' Lounge, but you may be going upstairs or floating on the street, wherever you might be going.
Yeah, well, interestingly, we went to the local pub that where my daughter lives down in Brunswick, and it was really pleasant. So we sat out in the beer garden. It was a beautiful autumn evening, and all the dogs were allowed as long as they behaved and they were on leads. There was a handful of dogs, very well behaved, sitting there, and it was extremely pleasant. They did pop the fire on, so that was also good. I reckon that'll do very nicely. So,
well, it's funny because we went just before we got to the Writers' Lounge. We went to a launch of the film clip that for my friend's song, which is featured in the upcoming movie. Well, I think it's just about in cinemas, Roadkill. And of which I, dear listeners, I get to play a little part too. I'm the pretend bass player in this one.
Very good.
Really good clip, and we'll be talking to the director and writer, script writer for that very soon. But went to a hotel to have it on the big screen and, obviously enjoy some beverages and some food. And there was a kids' party just in the next room sort of thing. And I thought, wow, have times changed. Front bars used to be terrifying to walk into. It was a rite of passage. And now you have kids' parties in
kids'
bars.
Parties there. Oh, yeah,
Who said pokies can't do good things?
Yeah, there weren't any kids at this pub on Saturday night. But there were dogs. Interesting. All right. So Writers' Lounge, here we go, and we will have our special guest with you very shortly. This is the most distant Writers' Lounge, I think, that we've been involved in. So welcome to the Writers' Lounge. Bec, all the way from Beijing.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I do currently live in Beijing. However, I was born and raised in Tasmania, which is the land of the Palawa people and always was and always will be.
Bec, you're already bringing back some very scary memories of when I had a brief little interlude of working in China, but only because it was so damn hot up in these mountains when I was there, and probably one of the most hottest and humid places I've ever been. But, looking back now, it's spectacular. But at the time, I had a phobia of the sun. But anyway, what brings you to Beijing, Bec?
Well, my family have been coming to Beijing for 23 years. In the year 2000, my mum and dad left our hometown of St. Helens and moved to Beijing to become international school teachers. My brother, who is younger than me, he went along as a grade 7 student, and they lived here and worked here in Beijing and at the school where I currently work until 2021, upon which my parents retired. But my brother and myself and my brother's wife and all of our children and my husband all work as international school teachers here in Beijing.
Oh, wow.
So
we're a little bit of a dynasty.
Yes, the Taylors are taking over Beijing. Oh, it wouldn't be the Taylors necessarily, but yeah, fantastic to hear. And teaching a whole range of things, Bec, or do you teach English as a second language, or primary, secondary? Where does the teaching go?
My current role, I am the teacher librarian for EY3, which is the 3-year-olds up to grade 2. Mm-hmm. So we run an international school curriculum, and we only have foreign passport holders as our students. That's a government regulation, not something that we impose. And we have kids from over 50 nationalities here at our school, and I teach in the medium of English, though we do obviously teach Chinese as a home language here for many of our students. Every student gets Chinese teaching, but some get it in their home language as well as English.
Well, what a brilliantly diverse group of people, community. That's fantastic.
Yes, it is a wonderful place to live and work.
Yeah.
We're going to have to ask any students that might be listening to this to block their ears for a sec, because now, Bec, we have to ask, what would you be drinking in your writer's lounge over there in Beijing?
I forgot to ask you about a drink.
That's a great question. My preference would be a G&T.
Yes. Very nice. I might even join you there. I just like mine with a squeeze of lime if it's available.
Oh, yum.
So, yeah, just put that in. What about you, Darren? What have you got in your glass this evening?
I think I'm going to stick with my 80s theme from the Reader's Café, and I think I'm going to go for maybe a Frangelico and milk, which is a far cry from my usual vodka and soda, but that's keeping up with that toffee, English toffee.
That is an oldie but a goldie. I will admit in the 80s I was drinking fluffy ducks and what else? Terrible, sweet, horrible drinks. But anyway, I've moved on my tasters. Yes, G&T is much better. Now, when I saw Bec Taylor, who we're chatting to here on Twitter, you were as part of the Global Literature in Libraries initiative, and of particular, #Tasmanian Lit Month. So, first of all, what's your connection to Global Literature in Libraries initiative? And then a little bit about Tasmanian Lit Month. Tell us what you've got.
All right. Teacher librarians in international schools are both quite a rare breed, but also very close-knit. So when I left China for the first time in almost 3 years in February, I was very lucky and went to a PD, a professional development conference in Singapore. And that was fraught. That was my first time out. And we've all lived through the same pandemic, though we all have very different experiences.
Absolutely.
Of it. And the borders here in China had just opened just 4 weeks prior to me leaving, and it was a tough experience.
Yeah,
the first time leaving these shores. But when I got there and I was surrounded by my people, it's just so wonderful to be in a room of 80 librarians who all just have the same shorthand as you and are there because they are desperate to learn from you. And Karen, who is the current executive director of the Global Literature in Libraries initiative, I've known her for quite a few years around the library traps, and she found out I was from Tasmania. She always knew that I was Australian, but it seems that Tasmania has a little bit of a mystique for North Americans.
Okay.
And now, after all of this time talking about literature in Tasmania, I think I figured out why. It is so unique. We are unlike anywhere else in the world, and I took that very much for granted growing up in Tassie in the 80s. All I wanted to do was get out. And now I'm just discovering what a phenomenal community of creators that we have in Tasmania. And when Karen asked me to write this series of 28 blogs, my first instinct was, yes, of course, because I can't turn down anything. I have one. But I didn't quite realise how much work it would be to find 28 disparate topics of which to investigate. I wanted desperately to do a good job, but I didn't even know where to start.
And so where did you start?
I cold called everybody I knew. I went on to Facebook and Twitter, and I literally just emailed every single person I went to high school with.
That's calling in some favours.
Yep. And then I emailed all the bookstores that I could find online. I emailed publishers. I just did lots and lots and lots of Google searching until I found lots of people that would talk to me. My dad was probably my number one source. He's still very connected to Tasmania, even though he and my mum now live in Victoria. And he is a prolific reader and still has strong networks there. So he reached out to all of his people that are still really active in the education community as well. And then I just ended up with the most wonderful collection of giving, kind creators I could possibly have imagined. I am just so lucky, I think. But really, I need to give a huge shout out to Chris Champion, who is the owner of 40 South Publishing.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Because he connected me directly with 12 of the authors that are featured this month.
That is brilliant. Well, shout out to you, Chris. Well done. And get in and buy some books from does he have a frontline store or online?
They have a big stable as well as a magazine, which
fantastic.
Is stunning.
Very good, very good. There are so many wonderful creators in Tassie, and I have read a number. And thank you very much for putting Michaela Kopievsky's Tasmanian Gothic in the blog from Zane as well. That was brilliant. And the other person who might not be in your networks, who we've had on the show, is author Kaneko Okiron. So Kaneko is biracial Australian Japanese. She's a young woman that draws as well, and she's written, not like in the movies, a lovely story about becoming famous. And it was lovely to chat with her. And we've talked to the Tasmanian Writer Centre down there. So all desperately trying to get as much as they can out to kids and young people to get them into writing as well. So hopefully there's a new stable of writers coming through after all the existing ones, which is great. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It definitely sounds as though, it definitely sounds as though this venture has, you said it obviously came with challenges and maybe a little bit more on the fork than you anticipated on chewing. But it also sounds as though what an opportunity to reconnect with a lot of people back home, especially the high school buddies, etc. But you're basically getting a huge hug from Tasmania, aren't you, while you're over in Beijing?
Oh, I feel so connected to my own past, which has been both a positive and a challenging experience, because I've come to realise, and it does make me emotional, I'm sorry, how little I knew about our First Nations experience.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of sadness and a bit of shame about that either I had been taught and I had forgotten, or that I hadn't been taught. And I've learnt so much. It's really challenging. There's been a couple of posts that are upcoming that I haven't finished because I'm just not sure how to, because the enormity of some of the content.
Yeah.
It is feeling
scary.
overwhelming.
Yeah. There's a beautiful series. I don't know if you have access to ABC iView, which is a streaming service for the ABC, and if you've watched Australian Wars. So that was, it took about 7 years to make. It was made by Blackfella Films, and Rachel Perkins is the producer. And one of the episodes deals with the massacres and the genocide in Palawa. So it could be worth you having a look and just getting a sense of sort of the connection. And it's never finished, but it is it's brutal in some of the things that happen. But like you, I was never taught that. We were taught that Australian history started when Captain Cook, arrived in Botany Bay, which, as we know, is so not what history should say. So, yeah, it is confronting, but this is absolutely the time to be sharing these stories. And, I agree, the shame that a lot of white people will hold it can hold us back. But, yeah, thank you for sharing that, Bec. That's really important.
And what's been, on a bit of a brighter note, what's been one of the most standout moments of this endeavour for you, Bec?
I think probably talking to Leanne Tanner.
Ah, right.
I felt like, she's very hard to describe. I felt like I needed to sit up straighter when I spoke with her. But in a really wonderful way. I just was entranced. The way that she spoke about her work, the way that she was so passionate about Australian English and the teachable moment that comes with understanding that there are many ways to speak and write and read in English. Mm-hmm. That's the hill on which I share. I think it's really important for North Americans to have our Australian literature in Australian English, because it is sometimes different parts of the world can have narrow focuses. And by the whole point of GLLI is that there is a world of literature out there that it is incumbent upon teachers, librarians, parents, booksellers to understand that the world is not just the English-speaking world, and it is most certainly not just the US English-speaking world. And we can explore the world through literature in a really safe and exciting way. And I felt like Leanne really got that, not just as a writer, but as also a consumer herself. Mm-hmm. And I loved that angle.
Yeah, that is really lovely. And I'll say that I started reading a lot more Indigenous authors, but I also started to think, well, what else is out there? So I'm trying to read some Chinese authors and some Indian authors, and it's just like there's completely different worlds. And I generally read fantasy and crime, they're my things, but just even the different mythology that goes into fantasy writing when you're based in another country is like, oh, this is just fascinating. So yeah, really lovely. So that's good. That is good. And what happens at the end of the month? Where are you up to with your blogs? You've got a few in the wings, you said?
Yep, I think there's still 10 to go, maybe 10 or 11 to go. Mm-hmm. And then by the end, I'll need to make a recap post, which will link to every single one of the previous posts, so it will all be in one place together. And then I've got to get out there and keep reading, because the amount of books in my to-be-read pile is far more than what I can actually cover.
You are technically talking to us from a library over there in China, and so I suspect your to-be-read pile is a lot bigger than just about anybody's.
Oh my goodness, it really is.
That's good. What is your favourite read if you didn't have to read for work or for teaching the children? What would be your favourite read?
Oh, that's a little bit like asking me my favourite child. My pure for me reading is YA sci-fi.
Ah, very good. Well, you're speaking to the right kind of people. Darren writes horror and sci-fi a bit, and the same, I write fantasy and sci-fi. So yeah, you're in good company.
It's the best. You know what? It takes you out of your life. But I really love YA sci-fi because I love it when teenagers get to be the ones solving the problems. There's so much in this world that teenagers can't solve, and to be able to have that little bit of power in their day, I think is really important. And I love Amy Kaufman.
I was just going to say, if you read the Illuminate files, yes.
Oh my gosh, I love that trilogy so much.
Brilliant.
It actually was one of our Panda Book Award titles a few years ago. It was an international school book award that we have here in Beijing.
And you're one of the judges, is that right?
Yes, I'm the chair actually.
Excellent.
So which means I get to boss other people around. And I'm on the steering committee in particular for the early years and the younger categories, which are our picture books.
Yes, Amy Kaufman and Jay Christoph, excellent. They can keep writing. As far as I'm concerned, lots of good things coming our way. Well, look, thank you so much, because I know you haven't been well, and we don't want to strain your voice. Thank you for coming to us from the library in Beijing, and we look forward to reading far more blogs on Tasmanian literature, and we are fully supportive of any promotion of Australian authors. So thank you to Bec Taylor for coming to us from the Global Literature in Libraries Initiative, and the hashtag for Bec's blogs, which you can find on her website, which is glli-us.org, and if you go to either the About or just about the blog, you'll see that. And also thanks to all the Tassie authors, and especially to Chris from, where was Chris from? What's his publishing?
40 South Publishing.
From 40 South Publishing, thank you. I didn't take the note quickly enough, for his support and putting you in touch with all those people. And yeah, Darren, any...
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bec, of course, a huge thank you for joining us in the Writers' Lounge and being our very first international live chat. So that's fantastic. But I do have a question before we let you go. So, as you know or may not know, here in Adelaide we have a couple of pandas that are technically on loan from China, and they were named here Wang Wang and Funi. So my question is, if you were to rename them temporarily to celebrate Tasmanian literature and this library initiative, what would you replace Wang Wang and Funi with?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. Okay. So we have to play some waiting music.
Yeah, we can play some waiting
that.
music.
No problems at all.
Oh, well, I should probably say Gothic.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'll be eager. That gets a vote, definitely. A panda called Gothic.
And Wilderness.
Oh, Wilderness.
Nice. Yes, good.
Well, then
that's
I
a
guess...
big theme. Big theme that's coming through is how important the wilderness and the wildness that comes with Tasmania, how it infuses the creator's work.
Oh, the original natural sort of surroundings.
Yeah.
But we have to we have to Aussify it a bit, so it could be Gothy and Wildy.
Nice. I like it.
Of course. Well, I have to give you my panda story now. So not only do I have a little panda holding my phone charger plug here, but when I was expecting my first daughter, the pandas were visiting Australia. This is in 1988. We had, and I don't remember their names, I'm sorry, but there were two pandas visiting Melbourne Zoo. So my husband and my good friend drove down, my friend drove down from Wodonga, lined up to see the pandas. We had to, of course, stand there for like 4 hours. So I am 36 weeks pregnant with my first baby, standing in line to see these damn panda bears. Of course, when we get there to the front, they had their backs to us. They weren't at all interested in anybody. And I went into labour that night. So, thank you, panda bears, for bringing on premature labour.
Oh, there you go.
But yes, Cassie and I always have a little soft spot for the pandas.
That's lovely.
That is lovely. And it was all very quick labour, probably because I stood up all day. So there you go. All right, so there we are. Get on to the Global Literature and Libraries Initiative. Follow Bec on Twitter. Have a look on the website. And now, Bec, on Twitter, you are, what is your tweet handle on Twitter?
I am at Bec in the Library.
Ah, beautiful. Excellent handle. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your work with us. And we will say to everybody, bye for now.
Thank you again, Bec. You've been an absolute superstar, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in the lounge.
Enjoy
Thank
your
you so
G&T.
much for having me.
Have another one. No one's in the library now. No one can see.
Welcome, book lovers, to another brilliant blog tip by the fabulous YA author and blogger, K.M. Allan. Good morning, Kate.
Morning, Veronica.
How are you this morning?
Good, how about you?
Yeah, also good. We've been having a little technology troubles, but we've got ourselves together now. And tell me what is on the blog this week.
We are talking about info dumping.
Info dumping, all right. Tell me more.
Obviously, it's one of those things where pretty much you bombard your reader with everything that you think they should know all at once.
So it's all those things you've been dreaming about that are in your head about the book, about the world, about every single character, and you try and just give it to them in one hit.
Exactly. And it's sort of a bit overwhelming, I think, for the readers. They probably don't want to know everything all at once.
Yeah.
No matter how much you want to get it all in there.
So what's your suggestion? What is your tip for avoiding info dumps?
Basically sort of spreading it out across the book. And really checking sort of, in this blog there's 5 ways to avoid it. So one of them, the top tip really, is pretty much checking the start of things. So like your first chapter, your first introduction of the character, the first instance where you're talking about the world, all that sort of stuff. That's sort of where you really like to just sort of put everything in there. And you probably really shouldn't. Just to make it a better read, it's better to sort of sprinkle that stuff throughout. And I think it comes up a lot when you're obviously when you're doing your first draft, you're trying to sort of tell the story to yourself. Get it all on the page. So you sort of just put it all in there, and then you sort of forget later on, maybe in other drafts you should be looking at where you've just sort of dumped everything and then just spreading it out throughout instead, just to make it a better read and just so you're not overwhelming everyone, because no one wants to hear everything all at once.
No, it can be really off-putting. I find if in the first chapter, the first half a page or page and a half is describing the world and the spaceship and the captain's uniform and every single person who's in the crew, and you think, where's the action? Start with some action.
It slows everything down. And you don't really want that when you're sort of trying to get readers interested in what's happening. So
no. And I have read that people say try not to put some of the stuff in, even if you think it's really interesting, because it's probably just interesting in your mind. If it doesn't contribute to the story, just leave it out. It's
really hard to judge that sort of stuff, isn't it, as yourself, because you just want to get it in there because you think, that's brilliant. And then, but that's where having really good beta readers and stuff comes in handy, because then they'll say to you, there's not as close to it as you are. So they can kind of go, I glossed over this bit, maybe look at taking it out. So
So the spots to be aware of, as you said, the first chapter in particular, the first time you introduce new characters. So writers, go back and have a bit of a look and see if that's what you're doing.
Exactly.
Very good. Kate, you have been blogging for quite some time. You have got lots of readers on your subscribers on your blog. What do you think makes people stay and keep listening? How are your blogs so good and so helpful? What do you hear? What's feedback?
Well, definitely, I started the blogs because I was trying to learn a lot of this stuff myself.
Yes.
And so then, as I'm learning it as well, I thought, maybe other writers might be interested in learning it too. So, turn it into a blog post, put it up there. And a lot of people have sort of said a lot of times, this is exactly what I was looking for, And so that's what's been really good and really helpful. And so I'm just learning for myself, sharing it around with everyone else, and just happy to know that other people are looking for that kind of stuff too.
Excellent. And I must admit, I have been the recipient of some of your fabulous wisdom. So absolutely appreciate you sharing the top tips with the Australian Book Lovers listeners. And we will put the link to the full blog on Kate's website in the show notes. But in the meantime, Kate, where can people find you?
KM Allan. So that's Allan with an A. So it's ALLAN.com.
Beautiful. All right. You heard it here on Australian Book Lovers. Don't dump info on your readers. Okay. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
So with our part in the episode coming to an end, because don't forget we've got a book review and all those things coming up.
And an amazing reading.
Oh, yeah, and an amazing reading. So just ever so quickly coming up in episode 81, this is me 2 in a row. I was really lucky again to draw the straw to talk with Danuka McKenzie. Danuka has her new book, book number 2, another fantastic crime thriller called Taken. And luckily, I've just finished reading it, but damn it for being so good, because I started reading it foolishly late one night and then read it till kind of 2 o'clock in the morning when my eyes would not stay open, even though it was so incredibly page-turning and compelling. So I'll have a review for you at the end of the next episode.
Well, but that means what for this episode? What do you think for our tagline?
Well, tagline, there's dark web, there's spooky kind of disguised voices, with those kind of things. I'm sure that we could do something like that.
Well, yeah, I think, the dark web has the potential to be a very overbearing and dark, dark web, but a naughty character. But I'm thinking of maybe a bad robot. And I say that because if you tried to explain the dark web to me in 1980, being that we're celebrating episode number 80, that would be my imagining, would be some sort of mad robot inside the computer. So I feel like being a naughty robot.
Yep, bring it on.
Okay, well then... I guess with the technology has given us a few hiccups this round, but it can also be our friend. So let us, for a moment, be bad robots.
Remember the mission, Veronica.
What's the mission, Darren?
We need to make sure everybody reads more
Aussie
books. That is the mission. That is the law.
That computes. Very
Again,
good.
Another world-class acting extravaganza for all.
Yeah. I think we've missed our calling, but, let's just stick to podcasting for a little bit.
Yes, but to everybody, thank you so much for joining us for episode 80. Absolutely fantastic to have you on board. Really excited about, all the guests we've had up to episode 80, and I'm really excited about all the guests we've got coming. And,
Indeed.
there's book contests, there's books coming out, there's people starting to write. There's just so much happening. So we've just had the Fringe, and then we've got the WA.
We've got the Melbourne Writers Centre. Melbourne Writers Festival is going on. I will say, just very sneakily, I did have some co-hosting duties with another writing podcast, but I can't say anything about that until later. So stay tuned.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, keep after us on social media. On Twitter, we're at Australian Books. On Instagram, Australian Book Lovers, and we're also on LinkedIn. And you can listen to our podcast on YouTube, which there's a new tab on our YouTube channel, which is, of course, saying podcast. So keep your eye out. YouTube's trying to support a lot of podcasting. So there you go.
Oh, what's that noise?
For some reason, we talked about bad robots. My printer over there is deciding to talk to itself. There is nobody printing anything, and there's no paper.
Oh,
it's so printing.
I suspect this episode has maybe that you've brought the dark web into your room.
I know. Maybe just talking about it, they know, and now they're trying to do it. So I think it's time for us to get off.
So the computer's glitched. The printer's going mad. I don't want to be a bad robot anymore. Thank you, everybody, and please enjoy the reading and enjoy the book review. And we'll see you at episode 81.
81. Take care and bye for now.
Take care, everybody.
This is the opening of Dark Mode. Sunday, January 15th, 2017. A spiderweb caught at Reagan's face as she turned the corner, its invisible strands trailing across her cheeks. Busy rubbing the web from her eyes, she got closer than she otherwise might have. close enough for the early morning sun to catch the wet inner cavity of the naked, pale-skinned torso on the concrete. A mannequin. It had to be. Human bodies didn't come apart like that. She edged forward. Gipps Lane was tidy, all bitumen and graffiti concrete, brick walls and 2 commercial dumpsters. Nothing alive, not a dandelion or a tuft of moss. Her Timex read 5:57 a.m. The sun had barely cracked the horizon, and already Sydney's mid-January heat was clinging to her skin. The body lay in a patch of light, its 2 severed pieces a half-meter apart, off-center. A mannequin wouldn't have a wet body cavity, and now that Reagan was closer, she could see flies crawling over the flesh. A metallic whiff of organ meat caught in her nostrils, jarring loose a memory of a night her mother had cooked liver for dinner. It's a body. Reagan stood frozen, the knuckles of both hands pressing into her lips. Above, masked lapwings broke the hush, their sharp cree, cree, cree like an alarm. There was no blood, none on the concrete, none on the body. And for someone to die like that, there should have been a lot of blood. The smell hit her again. Corpse flower. The plant's giant blossoms gave off a rotting, sweaty, mothbell smell to attract carnivorous insects. The woman's right breast was gone, leaving a rough edged circle of pinkish red flesh. A strip of her left thigh was missing. A grotesque Joker smile marred her face. Her skin was chalky. A rash of red bumps ran along the crease of her legs, and chipped turquoise polish covered her toenails. She had no clothes, tattoos, or jewelry, no handbag. Her face tilted eastward, like a sunflower. It was her hair that made Reagan gasp. The dark mess of it fanned around her head, quivering in the breeze. She straightened, head flicking right and left. No people, and along the bricked back walls and metal roller doors lining the laneway, no windows. On weekdays, there were more people about, but at dawn on Sunday, the streets looked abandoned. A fly crawled along the dead woman's lip, disappearing into her mouth. Someone had to call the cops, and there was no way it would be Reagan.
So, book lovers, we have an extra special guest today. One of our readers, David, was really lucky enough to get an early copy of The Connection Game by S.S. Turner. And now he's going to tell us a little bit about it. David, hello.
Hi, Veronica. Well, it was a most interesting book. Mm-hmm. I think the characters were well drawn out. They confused me totally right up to the very end. For example, Benny, the husband, appeared to be totally mad and off his tree. But in the end, I suppose I shouldn't tell you about the end. No spoilers. No. Belinda, his wife, was probably the character I liked most because she seemed to keep the family together, bearing in mind they were in a tiny bed set, a basement bed set, with only a tiny view of the street. The 2 children, Wendy and Will, I found them a bit of hard work, mainly because they were tied up in that, not tied up, they were stuck in that basement with their parents. But in the end, they came through. It was quite impressive. I really enjoyed the book. I certainly really enjoyed the ending. I thought that was brilliant. I mean, how much can I say? The old lady, shouldn't say what she did, but she intrigued me a lot because of which way the story went. It's hard to talk about it without
giving away all the secrets. Yeah.
But I thought that was a brilliant touch, something you just wouldn't even think of, to be honest.
Excellent.
So, no, I did really enjoy it, and it was well written and sort of kept you on your toes because it kept changing. I mean, following the people's shoes puzzled me.
Yeah.
And that's where I thought the husband, Benny, was a bit off track, but he sort of wasn't.
He came good in the end. So
Very good.
Is it different from, and I know the author, Simon Turner, he describes it as a literary fiction. It sounds like there's a little bit of mystery, it's contemporary, but there's sort of family drama, a little bit of all of those things.
Oh, there's certainly family drama.
Yeah.
Because they're living in such a small room, on top of each other. And really, Belle was the only one that really got out to have a sort of a semi-real life. But I thought it was part thriller, part family, part weird. But I found it quite intriguing.
Yeah,
and as it went on and on, you sort of got more involved.
Sort of drew you in.
Yes, because at the start I didn't know which way it would go.
Yeah.
Again, it's hard to speak about it without revealing what happened.
Well, would you, what sort of readers would you suggest, apart from people that like all those things, is there any kind of final word to readers as why they should pick up The Connection Game?
It's interesting. I tend to read a lot of crime, and this is quite different. Although in the end it turned out to be a bit similar, but it had more, the characters were more drawn out. You got into their minds a lot better than most crime fiction.
Right, good. Took you a little deeper.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. There you have it, listeners. The review of The Connection Game, written by S.S. Turner and reviewed by David. Thank you very much.
Let's meet again. Where magic happens.
Australian Book Lovers acknowledges First Nations peoples and recognises their continuous connection to country, community and to culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and honour the sharing of traditional stories passed down through generations. We're committed to a safe and inclusive welcome for authors and readers of all cultures and backgrounds, including people of LGBTQIA+ communities and their families.